Writing. The emergency room doors burst open with a violent crash, and before I could even understand why two paramedics were rushing toward me, one of them looked straight into my eyes with overwhelming relief and said, "Thank God you're her fiancé." My heart froze. I had never seen the woman lying unconscious on the stretcher before in my life. Blood stained the sleeve of her pale blue sweater, her face was bruised, and her fingers were desperately clutching a silver necklace as if it were the last thing connecting her to the world. I opened my mouth to explain the mistake, but something inside me stopped the words from coming. Looking at her helpless face, surrounded by strangers who expected someone to care, I simply nodded. In that single second, a harmless misunderstanding became the beginning of the most unforgettable chapter of my life. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can change someone's destiny and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone who still believes in humanity, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories that remind us how powerful compassion can be. Only a few hours earlier, my biggest concern had been whether I could afford another month's rent. I worked long shifts repairing heating systems, lived alone in a tiny apartment, and spent most evenings eating cheap takeout while pretending I enjoyed the silence. My parents had passed away years before, and the woman I thought I would marry had ended our relationship after deciding my ordinary life would never become extraordinary enough for her dreams. Since then, I had convinced myself that keeping expectations low was the safest way to avoid disappointment. Yet life has a strange habit of interrupting carefully planned loneliness when we least expect it. The doctors explained that the young woman had been found after a serious traffic accident. Her phone was damaged beyond recognition, her identification had been partially destroyed, and the only clue they had was a blurred emergency contact that somehow matched part of my phone number. It was nothing more than a clerical error created by broken records and panicked rescue workers, but it was enough to place me beside her hospital bed. The staff asked simple questions that I couldn't answer. They assumed I was overwhelmed by fear instead of confusion, and each passing minute made correcting the mistake feel more impossible. Leaving would have been easy, but abandoning someone who had absolutely nobody standing beside her felt even harder. The first night stretched endlessly. Machines beeped in quiet rhythm while nurses adjusted medications and whispered encouraging words to someone who couldn't hear them. I watched rain slide down the hospital windows and wondered what kind of life this stranger had lived before fate suddenly crossed our paths. Her face looked peaceful despite the bruises, and every so often her hand trembled slightly as if she were trying to wake from a nightmare she couldn't escape. I found myself hoping she would open her eyes, even though I had no idea what I would say when she did. The following morning, an older nurse smiled warmly every time she saw me still sitting there. She spoke about loyalty, saying not many people stayed by someone's side through uncertain hours anymore. Her words filled me with guilt because I knew I wasn't the man she believed I was. But another feeling slowly grew stronger than guilt. It was responsibility. Even if I had entered the room by accident, I was there now, and perhaps that alone mattered more than explaining how it had happened. Days passed before the woman finally regained consciousness. She looked frightened and confused, struggling to remember where she was or what had happened. Memory returned only in scattered pieces. She remembered her first name, Emma, but little else. The doctors believed the trauma had temporarily erased large portions of her recent life. She stared at me with uncertain eyes, searching for answers I didn't possess. Before I could explain anything, exhaustion pulled her back to sleep. I spent the rest of the day wondering whether honesty would comfort her or shatter the fragile peace she had just begun to regain. When Emma became stronger, she slowly learned that I wasn't actually her fiancé. I confessed everything, expecting anger or disappointment. Instead, she smiled with surprising gentleness. She admitted she didn't even remember whether she had ever been engaged. What mattered to her wasn't how we had met but who had stayed when she was completely alone. She thanked me for giving her a familiar face in a room filled with strangers. That gratitude weighed heavily on my heart because I realized kindness sometimes creates relationships stronger than history itself. Over the next several weeks, I visited every evening after work. We pieced together fragments of her past using photographs recovered from her belongings, conversations with investigators, and tiny memories that returned unexpectedly. We discovered she had moved to the city only months earlier for a new job. She had no close family nearby. Her parents had died years before, and the relationship she once trusted had ended painfully after betrayal from someone she loved deeply. Hearing her story made me realize our loneliness had taken different roads but somehow arrived at the same destination. Recovery was painfully slow. Physical therapy challenged every muscle she had, while emotional healing demanded even greater courage. There were mornings when she wanted to give up because simple tasks felt impossible. On those difficult days, I reminded her how far she had already come. She, in turn, reminded me that my own life didn't have to remain trapped in quiet isolation. Without realizing it, we were healing each other. As months passed, hospital hallways gave way to coffee shops, peaceful parks, and long evening walks beneath golden sunsets. We laughed over small mistakes, celebrated every milestone, and slowly built memories that belonged only to us instead of the accident that had introduced us. Friends often assumed we had known each other forever because comfort replaced awkwardness so naturally. Looking back, I realized destiny doesn't always announce itself with perfect timing. Sometimes it arrives disguised as confusion, fear, and impossible circumstances. One afternoon, Emma received the final report from investigators. They had successfully located a distant relative who confirmed there had never been any fiancé waiting for her. She confessed she had secretly hoped the hospital's mistake had somehow been true because imagining someone loving her enough to wait by her bedside had helped her survive the darkest moments of recovery. Tears filled my eyes as I admitted I had often wished the same thing, that our first meeting hadn't begun with an accident and a misunderstanding. Yet perhaps the truth was even more beautiful because neither of us had owed the other anything. Every visit, every encouraging word, and every act of care had been freely chosen. A year after that unforgettable night, I returned to the same hospital carrying a small velvet box inside my jacket. The same nurse who had first mistaken me for Emma's fiancé recognized us immediately and smiled through joyful tears. She joked that perhaps she had simply been early rather than wrong. Standing beneath the evening sky outside the hospital entrance, where fear had once ruled every heartbeat, I asked Emma to marry me for real. There were no flashing cameras or grand crowds, only two ordinary people whose lives had been forever changed by one extraordinary misunderstanding. When she quietly said yes, it felt as though every lonely day that came before had finally found its purpose. If this story has touched your heart so far, please pause for a moment and write the word kindness in the comments. We'd love to know that stories like this still inspire hope around the world. Life rarely follows the plans we carefully make. Sometimes the greatest blessings arrive wearing the disguise of mistakes, heartbreak, or unexpected responsibility. Had I corrected that medic immediately, I would have walked away believing I had simply avoided an awkward misunderstanding. Instead, choosing compassion over convenience introduced me to the person who transformed my understanding of love, family, and purpose. Real love isn't always born from perfect first impressions. Sometimes it grows quietly through patience, sacrifice, and showing up when no one else does. Before you leave, if this story moved you even a little, please like this video, share it with someone who believes good people still exist, leave a heartfelt comment telling us what part touched you the most, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories that remind us that even the smallest act of kindness can completely change someone's life. Because sometimes, the greatest love stories begin with a simple mistake, and one decision not to walk away.